Welcome to the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. I'm Jeremiah Regan.
And I'm Juan. We're on to lecture number 2 of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And this lecture is titled Marley's Ghost, Bah Humbug.
So, what kind of man is Scrooge?
He's the kind of man that says, bah humbug.
That's kind of a charming and inventive way to be grumpy.
Yep. That's one of the things I like very much. Actually, let me read from a page in the book, because I thought Dwight Lindley does a great job of describing him as somebody who is, in a sense, likable, but at the same time, relatable. But I think he goes too far. So I think this part describes him perfectly, and it's when he's responding to the idea of somebody saying to him, Merry Christmas. And so Scrooge says, "What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer?" So that's kind of relatable. But then he goes on to say, "A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." So that's a bit too much.
That's a bit too much. Well, and the way Dickens opens the book, there's kind of two starts. There's the famous opening line, "Marley was dead," to begin with. And then we get a couple pages of Scrooge describing the death of his partner, and one would think maybe his friend, and it's all very cold and calculating. We need to make sure we have all the signatures on his death warrant. Now let's analyze whether a nail is really the instantiation of something being truly dead, etc., etc. And then a few pages later, once upon a time, and the action of the story starts. But what Dickens has done at the beginning is given us this calculation. Instead of mourning his friend and his partner, it's just very rational analysis of whether this being is alive or dead.
Yeah, and we're going into a time of Christmas when people tend to be happy, at least if you're listening to the episodes as they come out. And this is a man who's really not looking forward to it. And we typically tend to look forward to Christmas, even though it's busy, even though there's a lot of spending that goes on. You still look forward to it because it's a time of happiness, of family, of celebration, and of celebrating Christ's birth. And he's definitely not looking forward to it. In fact, he's almost offended that people are talking about it being a merry time.
The celebration is wasteful. And one wonders, what's the point of having all these riches, of having all of your accounting books in perfect order, if it's not for something greater? The accounting books are not an end in themselves, but they kind of are to Scrooge. He's missing something, and he needs a reminder from the ghost of his former partner.
So as we head into Christmas, let's remember that we are about to encounter the divine. If you enjoy this course, I encourage you to go to hillsdale.edu/course. You can get a DVD copy of the course. Visually, I think it's one of the most beautiful courses we've done. The set of the course is a recreation of Charles Dickens' actual studio. It's beautiful. You can get the DVD and watch the course by going to hillsdale.edu/course. Now let's turn to Dr. Dwight Lindley and Lecture 2 of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Marley's Ghost, Bah Humbug.
Marley was dead. To begin with, this little 6-word sentence, I think, captures so much and is doing a number of different things. We got to think about it for just a minute. Those first 3 words, Marley was dead, who's thinking that? That's Scrooge. Scrooge, we can hear his voice talking to himself, talking sense to himself from the standpoint of Marley's appearance, later in stave 1. Scrooge is the kind of person who sees something like this and he tries to talk himself down. He was dead. I've seen him dead. I know he's dead. And then after the colon there, the second 3 words to begin with, that's the wry narrator giving us this actually kind of humorous comment on Scrooge's skepticism. Scrooge, he knows what he's talking about. He's a good, skeptical, materialist guy who can explain everything away. Maybe not, suggests our wry narrator. So we begin with this humorous note. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Already in there, we've got, as I say, the voice of Scrooge. We can hear it. This is the narrator talking, but we can hear his voice being colored by Scrooge's consciousness. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change, upon the stock exchange, right? We can hear the kind of voice of self-confidence that Scrooge tries to use with himself to explain this and make himself feel better. What does he encourage himself with? Where is Scrooge's name good? In that financial world that he works in, right? He's a money changer, he's a banker, he has a counting house. In that world of business and money and investments, he is sure of himself, and he's got a kind of careful confidence and control in his economic power. But what he's gradually, and we are gradually being made aware of here at the beginning, is there is another economy parallel to his own that he is not in control of. And this is, of course, inducing discomfort. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Soul, 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 soul. All of these repeated souls show us the aloneness of Scrooge and the aloneness of Marley. These are two guys who worked together, but they were together alone, so to speak. These are alienated, isolated people. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. He wants something wonderful to come from it. He wants to elicit our wonder, along with Scrooge's. Remember, this is a book meant to haunt us in the same way these ghosts haunt Scrooge. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in his taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts than there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Okay, so we've got an allusion here to the play Hamlet, which begins, famously, with his father as a ghost coming to him. Why are we connecting to that here at the beginning of A Christmas Carol? It's the supernatural impinging on the natural, coming into the life of a character and forcing it to change away from its own terms and into these otherworldly terms. Scrooge is going to be made to do the same thing, against his will, frankly, but it's going to change his life, this other world impinging on his. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Great opening description of our protagonist here. This Scrooge that we're getting is almost a walking symbol of lovelessness. He has no generosity. He's secret. He's self-contained. He's turned in on himself. He is utterly isolated and alienated from others and within himself. In addition, there's that coldness, right? I mentioned Dante earlier, and there are going to be Dante allusions later in this book. Dante imagines at the bottom of hell, not a fiery place, but a cold place. Satan, the devil himself, is wedged in the ice, and he's stuck there, cold and static, immobile. That, for Dante, is a symbol of loveless immobility. That's Scrooge, too. At the same time, we have to listen to the delight of these sentences, right? Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. These are actually fun to say. It's actually hard to read this, to say this, to hear this, without getting a twinkle in your eye, without feeling the joie de vivre of these passages. I say that because Dickens is trying to delight us even as he repulses us. For that reason, while we see what Scrooge is, that this loveless poor old man, we're also enjoying him in a funny way. And in fact, like this is one of the peculiarities of A Christmas Carol. It's hard to feel like Scrooge is completely evil because of the utterly florid descriptions of him. Not to mention the way he talks. Bah, humbug.
Good night, sir, and a Merry Christmas.
Bah, humbug.
When he talks like this, people who enjoy language this much can't be entirely bad, right? It's hard to just completely hate this man. The text doesn't let us do that. So we have set up Scrooge. He's cold. He keeps his office cold. He's making it cold for poor Bob Cratchit over there on the other side of the room. And we get to our actual beginning. That's all kind of preface or prologue. The story begins: once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. And then we get the description of the room, we get the description of the day, and so on. That once upon a time, though, is worth noticing. Why? Because that is a stock fairy tale beginning. This is another genre we have to throw into the mix. The fairy tale. What does he get out of the fairy tale? Fairy tales are magic, so we get that sense of magic. Once upon a time also means, though, no time. It puts us outside of time. This thing that's happening to Scrooge, okay, there's all of this 1843 color, London, so on and so forth, all of that quote-unquote realism, but we're also outside of time. This is happening in an imaginative space that has never happened and yet is always true. We're in this kind of timeless space. This will make sense, right, when we get into the ghosts who are taking us past, present, and future, and all three at once. Time is at play. Once upon a time, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts, and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warn them. We've got everybody moving by outside. There's life outside. There's lifelessness inside. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Not enough fire for poor Bob Cratchit. Scrooge's isolation is making other people suffer around him. The first thing that really happens that brings in action, it forces action into Scrooge's life, is his nephew's entry. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle, God save you," cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. So we get that voice first before we get any physical description of Fred. You have this voice breaking in on Scrooge, unwanted, unlooked for, and yet unavoidable. He's going to resist, of course. Bah, humbug. He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure. So we immediately have this stark contrast between these guys. Fred is immediately blessing his uncle. God save you. Merry Christmas. Wishing him the best. We have affirmation. We've got love, frankly. And then on the other hand, Scrooge, resistance, hard-heartedness. The opposite of affirmation. We've got negation. And we've also got heat on his nephew's side. He's been walking fast. He's all hot. We've got a glow, light. We've got ruddy handsomeness, whereas we've got cold, darkness, and ugliness, frankly, on Scrooge's side.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now. Or text the word Imprimis to 71844 and we'll send you a link to sign up for your free lifetime subscription. That's IMPRIMIS to 71844.
So we have this stark set of contrasts which are lining up on either side of the page or of the scene for us. Christmas, you can't really mean that it's a humbug. I do, said Scrooge. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough. He's looking for reasons. You have to have a reason to be happy, right? Come then, returned the nephew gaily. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough. Throws it right back at him in a humorous way, but pointing out that according to Scrooge's logic, right, he should be happy. Humbug. Don't be cross, uncle, said the nephew. What else can I be, returned the uncle, when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas, out upon Merry Christmas. What's a Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. If I could work my will, said Scrooge indignantly, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Like I said, Scrooge at some level is enjoying this. You can't make up metaphors like this, buried with a stake of holly through his heart. You can't make up stuff like this and not enjoy it, at least a little bit. There's a kind of shimmer going on in his rhetoric here. Okay, putting that to the side, what is oppressing Scrooge about Fred's worldview? What is bothering him here? What makes it Fred's world a world of fools, as Scrooge says? It's that it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add up. Life is a series of things being taken away from me. The years of my life, money, bills, everything is an onus. It's a burden. It's something passing. It's something lost. And we're supposed to celebrate? It doesn't add up. He wants to balance the books and make sense of it, but he can't. Whereas Fred is happy in spite of how much it costs to live. His happiness rises above all of the factors that could go into it. There's something gratuitous about happiness, in other words. That's what Fred shows Scrooge here. And Scrooge is vexed by it. Gratuity. The sum being more than the value of the parts. That's what Scrooge can't explain and what he's trying to resist here. It's foolishness. Notice that it is a kind of foolishness. It doesn't add up. It doesn't balance out. You can't explain it. "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it?" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." In other words, you don't observe it, you don't honor it, and so on. "Let me leave it alone then," said Scrooge. "Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you." "There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say," returned the nephew, "Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonged to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow travelers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say God bless it." We get Fred's spirit in these lines. We get the background of the sacred name and origin of Christmas, which has that of course, that undertone of Christ and the incarnation, this sort of like divine entry into human space, which gives the mystery to the time. We've got all of that, but then we also have this mysterious joy and love that Fred associates with this time. When we open up our shut-up hearts, even though we don't have to, even though there aren't good reasons for it, there's a love here that transcends all of the factors of life, which Fred appreciates and blesses. The clerk in the tank, Bob Cratchit, involuntarily applauded, right? So he's going to affirm too. Fred and Bob are on one side, they are drawn to this love at the heart of things. Scrooge is going to resist. "Let me hear another sound from you," said Scrooge, "and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation." He's saying this to Bob Cratchit. "You're quite a powerful speaker, sir," he added, turning to his nephew. "I wonder you don't go into Parliament." "Don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, he did indeed. He went the whole way over the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first. In other words, he said, "I'll see you in hell." So we've got Scrooge on one side, "I'll see you in hell," and then his nephew on the other, "God bless you," right? So they're kind of occupying opposite kind of spiritual ends of the spectrum. "But why?" cried Scrooge's nephew. "Why?" "Why did you get married?" said Scrooge. "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love. Pfft. Good afternoon." "Nay, uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon," said Scrooge. "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" Over and over again, gratuity with Fred. There's no reason for this. I'm just trying to do right by you. So this opening scene that we get in the office, Scrooge is given over and over again the gift of self of his nephew for no reason. It doesn't make any sense, that's for sure. And Scrooge is walling up, pushing away, resisting. We've got two ways of life here that are meant to be with us the rest of the book. So Fred eventually leaves. We'll see him again in a later stave. Some charitable businessmen come by to ask for money for the poor, and Scrooge throws out, "What, are there no prisons for the poor? Why can't they go there? And the union workhouses and the treadmill and the poor law, are they in full vigor? Yes, yes, yes. Why not let them deal with the poor?" These words, of course, are famously going to come back and bite him. The final line, which we have to notice, with which he turns away the charitable gentleman, he says, "The poor should die. If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population."
Well, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it. And decrease the surplus population.
Decreasing the surplus population. So there's a little bit of background here that could be helpful. There's a fellow named Thomas Malthus from the late 18th century who thought that there was a finite number of goods in the world. Finite amount of money, but also food, all the resources that humans need to live. There's only so much. So if you get above a certain point, there's not going to be enough for everyone to go around. Thus, the poor are going to die. And that's the survival of the fittest. That's what has to happen, right? It's sad but true. This is just the way things are. And Scrooge is echoing this here. I guess they have to die, decrease the surplus population. Keep that in mind also for a future stave. And that concludes our office scene. Now we're going to move over to Scrooge's house. This, of course, is where he will meet Marley's ghost, the ghost of his former partner. Now it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It's also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation, alderman, and livery, fancy being fantasy, imagination. Doesn't have much of that about him. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then, let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. This is a masterful little paragraph that builds up to the appearance of the face right there in the last phrase. It builds up our expectation. What is he trying to explain or explain away? What kind of unexpected, inexplicable phenomenon is he building up to? Marley's face. We get there. Right at the beginning of that paragraph, we have this language of fact, fancy. Scrooge is a man of facts. He's a man who likes to be able to put everything down on his ledger, explain it in good, cold, hard material terms. Fancy, imaginings, that is a terrain he does not stray into, but which his life in this book is going to force him into, against his will. So we're getting that set up, right? He's this kind of man, but he's being forced over to this other frame of thinking. Another way of being. Marley's face. We get that repetition there, which lets us hear the voice of Scrooge again. This is the narrator speaking, but we're colored by Scrooge's consciousness. You get the sense that he's trying to steady himself. Marley's face. Am I really saying this? Yes. It was not an impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it. It's carrying its own light with it. Like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. Goodness knows what that actually looks like. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That, and its livid color, made it horrible. Horror seemed to be, in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. All right, so what do we need to see here? We've got the face. Remember that the face of a human is the part that most of all reveals the soul, that reveals what's inside. It's the most private, it's the most personal part of a person. This is why you can't look at people's faces for very long, actually. Without getting uncomfortable, you have to look away. It's a very normal human thing. So he's having Marley's personhood, right? Like his whole uncomfortable presence pushed right out into what is supposed to be just a door of his own and under his own control. So this other person pushing into his life, just like Fred did earlier. So second thing, there's the dismal light and the curious stirring of the hair as if by breath or hot air. Our first indication that there's something, well, certainly otherworldly, but he's in a different place that operates under different, weather? It's under different material circumstances or immaterial circumstances than Scrooge finds himself in. There's also that note of, is it hell? Is it purgatory, actually? Let's just keep that hanging in the air for a minute. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. Okay, we're back to normal. He slowly opens the door, tries to go through business as usual now, walking up his stairs. Now, he's got to be feeling pretty uncanny. Look at the way that he tries to settle into his room, even though everything is not normal right now. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. You can hear him talking to himself. No, of course I want it to be dark, right? It's cheaper that way. You would only have to say that if he really, at some level, did not want it to be dark. Would make a lot of sense. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. I'm just going to make sure everything's okay here. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa, a small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel, Scrooge had a cold in his head, upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Lumber room as usual, old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs, and a poker. So, this is probably not what he normally does when he comes home. You don't normally look under your bed. You don't normally make sure that nothing is in your dressing gown. He, in other words, is acting obsessively because he has seen something. He's upset. He's jittery. He's afraid. But the novella shows us that rather than telling us that, right? We get the sense through that repeated, nobody here, nobody there, nobody, nobody, nobody. He's looking around nervously and we're following him. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, sat down before the fire to take his gruel. A few paragraphs down, the bells in the house are ringing. This is strange. This is unusual. There's a sense of mortality there. Bells traditionally were rung at midday at uncommon times for funerals. There's a famous line by the poet and preacher John Donne from the 17th century. Do not ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. When you hear the bell, think of your own mortality. There's a little note of that in these kind of ringing bells. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound. He hears noise on the stairs. Humbug still, I won't believe it. So he's resisting, he's refusing. Notice the language of belief. His color changed, though, when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, I know him, Marley's ghost, and fell again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. The tassels on the latter bristling, like his pigtail, and his coat skirts, and the hair upon his head. Notice that there is not a single verb in those phrases so far. It's just nouns, noun phrases. The same face, the very same, boots, coat. So he's just itemizing everything, but there's no motion. Everything is standing still. We're made to feel that, the kind of rigidity and frozenness of Scrooge before this specter. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. So, on the one hand, this is ghostly and infernal or otherworldly, and yet it's also Dickens / Scrooge, maybe even, can't help from letting out the humor in it as well. We should notice that chain. There's something Dantesque about this. This is very much in the world of Dante's Divine Comedy, where sinners, they're punished in a way that befits their lives. The idea in Dante's Inferno is people are oppressed by the burdens that they forge for themselves. Here, Marley, what is he oppressed by? By all of the way that he has made his living, by money, acquisition, and all of the terms that he has used to scrape in his money toward himself and control other people. He's now carrying that burden. Where is he coming from? Well, there are a few clues here. We hear of an infernal atmosphere around Marley. It seems to have an infernal atmosphere of its own. So infernal, that makes us think of hell. But there's another possibility. As I said, he might be more from purgatory. Not that, Dickens necessarily believes in purgatory. This is not a common 19th century English Protestant way of thinking. But this is a spirit here to do Scrooge good. He says he's here to get you out of my problems, right? To make it so that you maybe don't have to do what I'm having to do right now. Maybe I can spare you some suffering. Why would somebody in hell do that? Hell, like, people are traditionally beyond good by that point. Whereas this seems like this is somebody with fellow feeling, with love for Scrooge even. Okay, so is purgatory where this ghost is from? We're not ever going to know. I don't think we have to answer the question. I think Dickens chooses to leave it ambiguous. But this is a ghost with a capacity for good. First thing, though, we should see before they start really talking is Scrooge's efforts at explaining this specter away. After we get the description of Marley, Scrooge is incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" He's trying to talk tough. "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. So Scrooge is thinking to himself there. "Who are you? Ask me what I was." "Who were you then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "You're particular for a shade." He was going to say to a shade, but substituted this as more appropriate. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down?" Okay, so he's going to sit down. "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "I don't believe in ghosts," he said to the ghost. Right? There's something absurd about this whole scene, right? Looking at him, "I don't believe in you," right? And so on. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" asked the ghost. "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge is, again, enjoying these lines, I think, at some level. What are we hearing? What's important? We get this same materialistic skepticism that he brought out with Fred. Fred has no good reason for being happy. Scrooge can explain it away. He's got power over that. He can block it out and control it. Same thing with Marley. He's trying to block this phenomenon, like this ghostly, otherworldly, strange, intrusive phenomenon. He's trying to block that out too. "No, you're just my indigestion. I'm going to wake up tomorrow. This is all going to be gone." But the ghost doesn't let him have that explain away power. The spirit raises a frightful cry, freaks Scrooge out. Scrooge asks for mercy. "Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?" "Man of the worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" And then the ghost says, "I'm here because I'm condemned to walk the earth and to go forth in a way that I did not go forth in life." Listen to the way he describes this. "It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world, oh woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness." Going forth to walk amongst your fellow men. What does that mean? It doesn't just mean, I got to get out and about and go on some good walks. It doesn't just mean that. It means coming out to meet your fellow man and respond and be with and give yourself to them in response to their gift of self to you, right? In other words, to have commerce and loving interactions with other people. This is very basic. Every person is called to this. Marley says, those who don't go forth and respond to the call of life and other people, those who don't do that in life will have to do it after life. So that's the explanation from Marley. Parenthetically, we can just keep this in mind because what is happening to Scrooge here? He's being visited by person after person. First, living people, that doesn't work. Then dead people or ghosts, each of whom is coming into his life and trying to elicit a response. Life is a set of calls on Scrooge and parenthetically on all of us, of course. It's a series of calls on our attention, on our time, on our presence. Will we respond? This is the drama that Scrooge is thrust into in this book. Scrooge says, but you were a good man of business, Jacob, right? Like, what's the problem? You did what you were supposed to do in life, didn't you? Of course, Scrooge is also thinking of himself here, right? I'm doing my business. Isn't that all I can do? Business, cried the ghost, wringing his hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. So he's reframing business, right? Your business is to love your fellow man, right? It's to get out and mix it up with people and to engage life. That's what we're here for. It held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of all of its unavailing grief, and flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, the spectre said, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Another little gospel allusion there. Especially at Christmas time, to go forth with the wise men to where the poor are abiding. Because after all, the Christ child himself is in a stable and in a situation of poverty. That's where you're going to find the meaning of life and find these divine encounters in this life that Marley is describing. So we've got a lot of details here to frame our story. Marley says, okay, I'm here for your sake. I'm here to give you a chance and a hope of escaping my fate. A chance and a hope of my procuring Ebenezer. I'm doing you good here, trying to. This is going to happen through a series of ghostly visits. And Scrooge says, I think I'd rather not have visits from ghosts. Can we work around that? Is there a workaround here, right? Without their visits, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take them all at once? Can I get this all over with? No, one at a time. Past, present, future, all of these are necessary. We got to be keeping in mind what is happening. Why does he need these ghosts in this order? Why does he need to see all of this? Somehow he does. That's bound up with the meaning of this work. And with that, Marley departs. Scrooge goes to bed nervously. We end our stave. In the next stave, we'll be looking at the ghost of Christmas past.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hillsdale Online Courses podcast. If you want to continue learning about A Christmas Carol or other topics, please visit hillsdale.edu/course. There you will find over 40 free online courses, including the history of classical music, Paradise Lost, Theology 101, and many more. The courses include additional readings, study guides, fully produced videos, and you can chat with your fellow students on a dedicated forum. Upon completing a course, you will also get a certificate. All our courses are free because we believe that a virtuous citizen is the best defense for liberty. So pursue the education necessary for freedom and happiness at hillsdale.edu/course today. That's hillsdale.edu/course. Thanks for listening.